All right, gentlemen, this month's masterclass for men is called How to Be a Renaissance Man. Listen, have you ever wanted to approach and meet a woman but found yourself with nothing to start that conversation off with? Or worse, you've been in a conversation with a woman that fell flat because you found yourself with nothing to continue that conversation with. Well, the absolute best cure for that is to be the proverbial jack of all trades. If you're listening to this podcast within the first several days of its release, this essential masterclass for men is being held Wednesday, the 29th of November, 2023 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Expect at least 18 specific areas where you can increase your knowledge and your worldliness in record time, all to the amazement and intrigue of the most desirable women everywhere. Plus, when you're a Renaissance man, life in general simply becomes more exciting and fulfilling all around you. How to Be a Renaissance Man, this coming Wednesday night, November 29th. If you can't make it live the night of the event, no worries there. But either way, be sure to snap up your ticket at mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass. And I'll look forward to seeing you there.
Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scot McKay, at Scot McKay on X, on YouTube, and just about everywhere else with the exception of Instagram and now Threads, I guess, where I'm at Real Scot McKay. If you haven't been to the website lately, it's mountaintoppodcast.com. Lots of goodies there for you. And also, as always, the thriving Facebook group is the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. Got a new friend of mine today for you. He is a fellow dating and relationship coach out of Phoenix, Arizona. This is his first time on the show. Patrick James, how you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Excited to be here. How are you doing?
Yeah, likewise. We had a pretty good talk, chatting away before we hit record on this thing. And we got lots to talk about because the topic du jour is how to love women again if you've become jaded. And as you and I were talking about, both of us have plenty of cause in our respective backgrounds to kind of, be a little angry with women, be a little pessimistic towards women being in our lives. You know, in my case, these guys know I was married to a schizophrenic woman who reduced my life and that of my daughter to cinder and ashes before she left and even after she left. But it's been a long road there. And of course, these guys also know that I'm married to the greatest woman I've ever met and have been for 16, almost 17 years now. But these guys know my story. So, Patrick, what I'd love for you to do is riff a little bit about why this particular topic today is so important to you, that topic of how to love women again, even if you've become a little bit jaded in the past. Why is this such an important message for you to deliver to men?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think this is an important topic because, a lot of guys might find themselves in a similar position to yourself or even like myself where I wasn't necessarily getting out of a toxic marriage, but for me, it was, I was really putting women on a pedestal and I was the nice guy who kept getting friend zoned by women that I really had a lot of feelings for. Unfortunately, I don't think the majority of guys have the same type of response to adversity in life that you and I did, which led us to even being on this podcast today. A lot of guys tend to fall into a bad mindset, addiction, victim mentality. And I think if you live in that emotional state of just constantly being jaded, like, fuck these women, nobody sees the value in me.
Figuratively, not literally. Usually.
Yeah, because those guys probably aren't getting any fucking. But I would say, men, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you feel even somewhat jaded about your dating history or how you've been treated in the past, it's really easy to fall into the trap of identifying with your past, but I don't think that's conducive to you actually living to your fullest potential. And so that's why I think, I'm really excited about our topic today,
Yeah, man, you said a lot of great things there. First of all, this idea of victimhood is anti-masculine. A real man doesn't say, oh, woe is me, I'm powerless, everything is being done to me instead of me doing unto something else. There's no concept of kind of penetrating the world, even sexually, as a masculine man in that context. It's more like, oh, well, poor me, I'm schlep rock, I got a cloud hanging over me. I can't really control my destiny. I have no control over anything in life. I'm looking for a handout from you, the government, anybody who will give it. If there's a woman out there who can help pay the bills, that would be great. And as a matter of fact, I'm a little bit ruffled over the fact that I have to approach her and ask her out. Why can't she approach me and ask me out? Saith this victim who has absolutely no masculine presence at all, and therefore, perhaps ironically, can't understand why he's not attractive to these said women who would pay his way and do all his bidding and basically do all the heavy lifting for him. Am I onto something?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, even along these lines, man, so many thoughts are crossing my mind, but I think what it comes down to me is there's a moment of time, a decision that you make when you find yourself at a low point after maybe a woman treated you badly or you got out of a toxic relationship. And I think that crucial fork in the moment road is where, you know, like I said, I had to decide that I'm not going to be the guy who's terrible with women. And I had to, through massive action and willpower and anxiety and overcoming fear, force myself to actually come out of that and actually start getting results with women. I'm curious for you, like, what was it for you that allowed you to not be jaded? Because it sounds like your situation was very like traumatic in a way. Like, was there a moment for you where you were like, fuck this, I'm going to be the best version of myself, I'm going to have an amazing relationship? Yeah, so I'm curious, after that relationship, was there a moment like that for you where you decided that you were going to, you know, step into your greatness, if you will?
Well, I'm not sure I've stepped into anything that smells like greatness yet, but I have 2 whippets in the house, so I step into a lot of other stuff all the time that doesn't smell so good. So I'm avoiding your question, aren't I? These guys know the answer on my side. What happened was, see, everybody said to me, you were the greatest husband, you were the greatest father, you did nothing wrong. It was your crazy ex who literally left our reality and took everything down with it. So, you know, you couldn't have done a better job. You were great. But see, that made me feel like the aforementioned victim. In other words, how does it make a man feel when he's done everything right and still got kicked to the curb and still lost? Well, that isn't very empowering. That means I've done the best I can and failed. So what I did was I decided, and it was a conscious decision, to remove myself from that perception of failure that was actually being thrust upon me by everybody else. I mean, they were trying to be nice to me. They were saying, Scott, you couldn't have done anything better. You're this great guy. But it had the opposite effect that they intended, of making me feel worse about myself. So here are a couple keys. Here's how I didn't get jaded. First of all, I took ownership. I said, I am responsible for my future. Second of all, this was one woman. She did not speak or act on behalf of everybody who is female in the entire world. Period. Okay? And you know what? I think everybody knows this. When they start getting jaded and they give up and they get all angry and pissed off and vindictive because of what one person did to them, they know they're acting like a victim. They know that there is no truth in the fact that if one person's like this, they're all like that. That's a logical fallacy. And as a matter of fact, I'll go one up from there. That's how systemic racism and all kinds of hate, all manners of human hate happen. Here's a person who's not like me. They're a little bit different. They do bad unto me. Therefore, everybody who's different the way they are is the same. And that is absolute ignorance. So yes, I didn't want to be an ignorant, foolish person who let this woman who ruined my life somehow have superpowers over me for the rest of my life in jading me against all other women, when basically she's the last person on earth who deserves to have superpowers over me. So I decided, hey, you know what? Let me look at this thing objectively. I had a crazy ex-wife. She ruined my life. Okay, well, my mother, my sister aren't crazy women. They treat everybody with respect. They have good relationships. Most of my coworkers, most of my female friends, a lot of my friends have girlfriends, wags, wives, and girlfriends who treat them right. There's got to be great women out there. So what I want to do is get better in two specific areas. First of all, I want to understand women. It is an old wives' tale, perhaps ironically, that you can't understand women and that women can't understand men. You ask either gender and they'll say, well, we're easy to understand. Well, we are, as long as we're willing to get down to the brass tacks of why that is. So I did that. And these guys have heard me talk about that time and time again on this show. It's a major theme. Second of all, I was going to get better at being attractive to women. I was going to attract a better woman by virtue of what I did to be a better man. And that's where the idea of the Big Four came from, where these guys know what that's all about. I practiced it. And the next thing you know, about a year and a half after my divorce, my friends are like, where are you coming up with all these women you keep bringing around to all of our social functions? I think maybe you should write a book and tell us about it. And, 18 years later, here we are.
That's awesome.
But enough about me. I want to hear more of your story, because after all, this is my show and I'm supposed to be doing the interviewing, right?
Nah, I mean, we're getting to know each other, as you said, before the podcast. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. The whole thing about, if you think about what it is to be playing that victim mentality or being jaded, I think jaded is a good synonym for just being a victim. But I believe there's this energy of it's all them. It's all these things that have to do with everything else other than me, right? And so it's like the world is doing this upon you. And I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that to come out of that, if you find yourself in that place, you have to take responsibility. As you said, taking ownership, meaning that, okay, you had a toxic relationship. You might have been very well wronged, right? However, at some point, you have to take responsibility for your own results. If you are not happy with the position that you are in life, one, get out of that position. So for you, it's getting out of that relationship. But then secondly, it's not living in the fact that you believe that the world is a place that's out to get you. You should start reframing it as the world is a place that is basically my oyster. It is what I make of it. If I choose to live in a mindset of being jaded, well, guess what? My life is probably going to be very conducive to someone who can play the victim. And that's how you get these Karens who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they just hate the world and they're just wreaking havoc for no reason, right? But I think when I said earlier, like stepping into greatness, I truly do believe that, you and I and everyone here is capable of more than we probably ever thought possible. Like if you would have told me, a guy who was born in small town Kansas, that I would become a dating coach with thousands and thousands of men following me from 83 different countries around the world, I would have thought you were fucking crazy, because most of my life I sucked with women, right? But I had a similar moment for me where, like you, getting into for me, it was like I was talking to this chick for 6 to 9 months or whatever, and then we'd kiss and stuff. But I didn't know what flirting was. I didn't know how to get an interaction to move forward past just like, I like this girl. And so I would make all the classic mistakes, confessing my feelings, trying to be extra romantic. And I realized this stuff is not working for me, right? And so that's where I kind of started getting into, that's when I first even heard about the term like approaching a woman. To me, like I was, I guess, so sheltered in my mindset to where I didn't even like, I thought that if you go out to a bar or a restaurant or anywhere, that you have to talk to the people that you came with. And if you don't know anybody, then you're kind of fucked, right? And you're kind of a weirdo. Well, it dawned upon me once in my early 20s, I think I was like 21, after, this girl who I'd essentially been chasing for 6 months, she had another boyfriend just out of nowhere. And I wasn't necessarily her boyfriend. In retrospect, I was hardcore in the friend zone, but I had confessed my feelings for this girl. I had written a love letter to this girl to try to get her to like me again. And, I realized, much like yourself, I have to figure out how to actually get women to like me, because what I'm doing is not working, right? And so when I learned about, okay, I can approach a girl anywhere and just like talk to her to me, that was my my version of me taking responsibility for my results. I'm not going to just settle for, okay, hopefully some girl gets hired at my work and I have like a hot coworker. Because usually when I was talking to girls, it would be the coworker who I had a little bit of chemistry with that one time. Right. And the majority of guys that I tend to work with, you know, the first question I ask them is like, okay, how often do you meet women and how do you meet them? And if a guy tells me like, oh, she was a coworker or she was a friend of a friend or we had a class together, all I'm hearing is you don't know how to meet women, which means that you're not really in control of who you meet and how often you meet them. And so taking responsibility for me, kind of to answer your question in a roundabout way, that was like the first step for me to take responsibility, you know?
Yeah, well, several things there. First of all, if you're writing these long, lugubrious, handwritten letters to women, that's just the kiss of death. And you know when I realized that, after having done this more times than I care to admit with previous women I had known, is when a woman wrote me one when I was trying to break up with her. I was like, man, is this ever pathetic? She's just trying to guilt me into sticking around, and this woman's just in way too deep here, and I'm being pushed further away. I'm like, well, holy crap. That's how that works psychologically, you know? And so that's one thing. As you were talking in general, several things came to mind, kind of centered around our topic of men becoming jaded. Yeah. First of all, look at all the different terms we've applied to this. Angry, jaded, we haven't used the words bitter or cynical, complaining, victimhood, such nasty words that just stink like raw sewage, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's not what you mean by raw dating advice, which is your brand. You mean something different. Yeah. So basically, anytime you start feeding those emotions, they tend to multiply. They tend to start stacking up, and you kind of get into this vortex of negativity that starts feeling like comfort food to you. It's like the easy button. I have an excuse not to go talk to women anymore. I have an excuse not to succeed with women. I have an excuse not to succeed at all. I have an excuse to stay poor, broke, ugly, unattractive, old, unhealthy, out of shape. The list goes on. And it's almost like there's this demonic power over you that isn't positive, isn't good, isn't healthy, that spirals you into almost liking this negativity. I know, for example, when I went on my weight loss quest a couple of years ago, I was getting depressed and kind of like, well, I'm old, I'm going to stay fat, etc. And, if I die, I die kind of thing. Not that bad. I don't want these guys to think I was in that dire strait. But after a simple 48 hours of cutting out the alcohol and cutting out the carbs, I felt like a new guy. And not only in the manner of me having more energy such that I'm looking for projects to do when I was putting those projects off just, 72 hours ago because I didn't have the energy, but I started wanting to live more. I wanted to feel alive again. I started getting excited about things because my psychology had been affected, and it was kind of like boiling the frog over time. It started with a little unhealthy habit there. It started with getting just a little bit overweight and out of shape. And the next thing you know, I have an excuse, and I start trying to tell myself I like it this way when it's really miserable. And I think that's where a lot of guys who are men going their own way, these red pill guys who want to blame women for everything, I think that's where they're coming from, is this place, well, it's convenient. I can stay here if I want to, right? But see, that brings me to the other major point you made a few minutes ago. Guess what, gentlemen? If you're jaded towards women, you can't count on the women themselves to come rescue you from this. First of all, that's anti-masculine as well, right? Second of all, they have no reason to, because they're not attracted to you anymore. They're focusing more on the guys who have it together and, well, for starters, don't dislike women. What's a woman to do with a guy who dislikes women any more than we as guys are going to want to get in relationships with women who can't stand men? So here it is. And you alluded to this, but I really want to drive this point home, okay? It is up to us to stop being jaded against women. And that is the greatest news in the world if you're anti-victimhood, because then you have agency. You have power once again. You can flip this switch. You can change these habits. Whatever it's going to take you from here to there again, or to restore your faith in women, starts with restoring your faith in yourself. You can't be a victim. You have to do this. You have to make a decision practically, maybe even psychologically, to say to yourself and perform the actions, do the work, right? It's not an easy button, to get better with women. And I want you to riff on that. It seems like we're trading riffs here, which isn't a bad thing. We're both excited about this. But talk for a few minutes to these guys about what we can do. What should we do to get out of this rut? And, you know, to me, it all starts with getting a little angry that you're in that rut to begin with. So you want it more. What say you?
Yeah, man. It's funny because you bring up the MGTOW movement, which admittedly I'm not too well versed on, nor do I have any interest in doing so. Because when I hear about it, it's like, to me, that is the ultimate victim mentality. He came into the dating niche with good intentions, like the red pill tends to do. And here's the thing about red pill. There's an element of truth to red pill concepts. But I think when a guy lives there for too long, you start to almost view women as the opposite team. And this almost light bulb moment hit me actually a month ago. I was going out with a client of mine. And I said to him, I was like, after a weekend and hanging out with this guy, I was like, dude, I don't know if you realize this, but you talk to women as if they're another species. Do you realize that? And he was like, what, really? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, don't you? And I was like, no, they're females, but they're still the same species. And so the biggest thing that I could say, what can you do if you are the type of person who, and I know I'm like, this is probably going to go over the head of the people that we're talking about, like people who are so jaded to where they hate women. If you feel like you hate women, you honestly, the best thing that you could possibly do is talk to more women, because if you see women as so vastly different than you that you can't even associate them as the same species as you, even subconsciously, it's not conducive to you actually ever getting women, right? Men and women naturally have like the masculine energy and the feminine energy, which is allows the flirtatious energy, the sexual tension, right? But ultimately they are people, right? And people can relate to people. If you can't relate to people, then you need to talk to more people, because those are social skills that are going to carry you not just through dating, but pretty much in every area of life, right? And so, you know, admittedly, Scott, I don't necessarily identify with the victim mentality myself, which is why it's so hard for me to necessarily relate to people like the MGTOW type of movement. But I guess what I would say to kind of like wrap this up in a nice bow is there's an element of truth to the red pill mindset, which is why some of these core fundamentals of what red pill promotes and stuff do help you actually get better at talking to women and attracting women and understanding the opposite sex. But you also have to be mindful of overstepping that line to where you start to view them as the opposite team. Because I think ultimately when it comes to seduction, the best seducers in the world have the uncanny ability to make it feel like a win-win situation where you guys are ultimately on the same team. You know what I'm saying?
You mean it's not?
It is.
It should be. It is.
Absolutely.
When it's done right. Yeah. If you're not predatory. All right. Several things there. First of all, I've got to laugh at myself here, because for years I thought I was being really cute and coy by telling men in the context that you're speaking of that I promise you your DNA is closer to a woman's than, say, a chimpanzee's, right? They're human, just like you. And then I stumbled across a peer-reviewed study, probably about half a year ago. I think I mentioned it on this show. I certainly did in my Facebook group, where actually male chimpanzees and male humans are closer genetically than male human beings and female human beings, which blew my mind. So I can't say that anymore. But I am going to still agree with you that they're still human, nevertheless. Listen. We all got cooped up with COVID. We've all been brainwashed by social media in our own little echo chambers, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about this on this show. People are starving to be social again. Men and women. And we are social as humans, right? I mean, I know guys who can seduce women when they don't even speak the same language. I mean, how about this? Start with women who speak English. Maybe you can relate to them a little better just for practice. Okay. Women want to be women. Heterosexual women have nowhere to go if there aren't heterosexual men out there, which means heterosexual men out there, your sexuality isn't evil. It isn't necessarily toxic, et cetera, et cetera. Just like you said, there's an element of truth with the red-pilled community. Okay, fine. We need to watch out for the family law system. Yes, masculinity is under attack. Yes, some women are psychotic and they're narcissistic and they can destroy you in even more harmful and probably even surreptitious ways than most men can. Yes, most women are the ones who file for divorce. Maybe more women cheat on their spouses than men do. Who knows? All I know is, yes, when you focus on the negative, you're feeding that negative. It's back to that vortex, right? One of the things that angers the MGTOW guys, the red-pilled guys, the manosphere guys so much about this practice is, yes, I am happily married to whom they would say is a unicorn, but really isn't. She just matches up well with me because I don't hate women. She didn't hate men. We both are optimistic and generous, but this time we're not married to a crazy narcissistic person who's going to take. We finally found each other. It's not a unicorn at all. But what really angers them is I'm not a pansy ass. I'm not Pollyannish. I believe it's not true at all that one gender is golden-hearted and can't do any wrong, and the other gender is black-hearted and can't do anything right. I think most of us, male, female, or otherwise, have gray area there, right? The trick is to go into any relationship, friends, business partnerships, and yes, women, with the lights on. Just because she's got a nice ass doesn't mean she gets to ruin your life. What I tell these guys, Patrick, is find a nice ass who's not going to ruin your life. Okay, so that's the secret to it. But like I was beginning to say, these guys who are very dark and cynical towards women need for me not to exist, because not only do I live the dream with a great woman, but I'm very honest about those things that we need to watch out for. And to them, you know, it's got to be all or nothing. You know what I mean? And I want to add one thing before I let you riff, because I think it'll basically fuel your fire. People who are bitter, people who are angry, people who are cynical, people who are easily offended, they suck. These people suck. They don't make friends. Nobody wants to be around them. People avoid them. And then what do? They start heaping blame onto everybody else for not accepting them and not liking them and not promoting them. And of course, blame is a primo hallmark of victimhood. So all these fables we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel comfortable, all this junk food psychologically that we feed ourselves, who's responsible for that? Who gets us out of that rut? It's us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just expand upon what you were saying there. I think ultimately, if you find yourself where you're now single, maybe you got out of a toxic relationship, or maybe you've just never had success with women, and that's kind of the reason you're jaded. I think if you really want to turn this around for yourself and you want to, like, you're listening to this and you go, okay, I want to stop playing the blame game. I'm realizing that I've been playing the victim. Yes, I am jaded, and maybe you have every right to feel that way, right? But ultimately, that's not going to get you to the next level of your life. And I'll say this, you know, Scott, you and I were talking about kind of relationships before we hit record here. And one of the biggest things that I learned, having gone through the pickup phase of my life and now being in a great relationship, a woman who I chose from a place of abundance, and I think that's a key word here, rather than kind of settled out of scarcity, which leads to maybe some toxic relationships.
That is an underrated point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you get into a relationship that truly is great, you realize that making a relationship work is a whole other skill than getting a girl to want to have sex with you or make out with you, or just having that momentary emotion of attraction while bantering with you. Being in a relationship is a very different thing. And I think it's something that you said earlier, where it's like, a great relationship is not like a match made in heaven. It's not like you two were perfectly made for each other. I don't necessarily believe in the concept of soulmates. I think that was kind of created by the gift card industry or something like that, right? But what I believe is that you have to ultimately realize that you're going to have varying levels of compatibility with different women. And if you've had women in the past that maybe you got into that relationship out of a place of scarcity, the compatibility there is irrelevant because that's the only option you got. You got to make it work, right?
Well, yeah, you star-crossed yourself from the very beginning. And now you want to blame all women for that? Yeah, do better.
Exactly.
Right? Go ahead.
So when you get into a relationship with someone that you genuinely chose, and kind of like what we were saying before, if you're doing it right, they're also choosing you. It's a win-win here.
Yes.
Then you realize that to be in a good relationship, which you could probably have great relationships with many different women, but it's about being a good unit, working together as a team. And there are many great teams, and many teams have different dynamics, but ultimately that's what's going to make it work. And if you get stuck into this victim mentality, you're literally depriving yourself of 50% of the fulfillment that comes from interacting with women, which is being in a great relationship, you know?
Well, you're depriving yourself of the other 50% too. Because I don't think you're even going to have a whole lot of one-night stands or cheap flings or anything like that. Because women just find it anti-masculine and therefore unattractive.
Absolutely.
You know what I do when someone invites me to something and I don't know them very well? I'll say, hey, can I bring my cute little girlfriend with me? And they'll go, I thought you were married. And I'll go, I am. But she's still my cute little girlfriend.
Yeah.
Right. That catches people off guard because now that we're married, our relationship is supposed to be a little bit different where we're not flirty and we're not seducing each other and going out on dates and having sex because we want to and are still hot for each other. But see, that never changed with us. But indeed, what you said is true. You have to find someone who is your best friend, who you're also hot for. I think it's both and.
Yeah.
You also talked about having chased women in the past to no avail and writing the letters. And then now you've arrived at the same conclusion I have independently, which is it's not like we should be chasing women. And importantly, they shouldn't be chasing us either because that's equally unattractive, namely to us. But when people choose each other, when I'm choosing a woman from many options and she's choosing me from many options, what happens there is there's actually greater safety and security in that relationship because we actively made that decision, like you said, from a position of abundance, not scarcity. Yeah. And how can you not like someone you chose? But I'll tell you this, I had to be one half of a great relationship before I could expect a woman to join me as the other half. And that had to do with me fighting my way out of that victimhood rut. And yes, building my own self-esteem, liking myself again, and yes, also really liking women and giving them a chance. And when I led that way, I was very pleased with the results. Voila, go figure.
That's amazing, man. So I guess I would say, you know, if you want to genuinely improve, you know, your skill set with women, but also just your dating life in general, and maybe you want that female companionship of having that teammate, that person that you chose and she chose you, I think first you got to ask yourself, like, okay, at this point in time, what is my goal with actually getting better with this? And I say that because your goals can change over time. For me, when I first kind of like accepted this journey, if you will, I just wanted to sleep with every girl possible because I was so inexperienced, because I never had success with women, that as soon as I got that little inkling of success, I started to realize, oh, this is kind of fun. And, oh, I actually like really am starting to see women in a positive light. And like, why would I jump into a relationship if I could just keep doing this for forever? And then I turned 26, 27, 28, 5 years of just trying to bang everything that I could, right? Now I reached a place where, you know, I think it's cyclical, and I think you could probably go back and forth, right? But I reached a point where I was starting to have that abundance with women, but I was craving more depth in those relationships. I realized that a lot of my interactions were very superficial. They wouldn't go past 1 or 2 weeks. And a lot of the conversations started to feel like conversations I've had in the past. Like I would go out and feel like I'm having deja vu over and over again. Right. So I reached a point where that was no longer emotionally fulfilling for me, to where that's where I started to now seek out, okay, who could I go deeper with, and what women do I want to go deeper with of the potential options I have? And I think when I reached that point in my life and I actually met another woman who was also probably in that phase of her life, I had a big moment of realization. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I realized that people will go through cycles where they want to rack up the numbers, get experience, have fun. And then they also want to kind of settle down and focus on other areas of their life, to where they can kind of get into that fulfilling relationship where you guys really work as a unit. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with either one of those. And for me, I also realize women are doing the exact same cycle, to where sometimes, moments where I could be jaded, where I look back on previous interactions I've had with women where I'm like, this girl is amazing. She's great looking, but maybe I would want to go deeper with her. Maybe she's in a cycle where she's not ready for a relationship. She just knows she can't commit to that, right? And so ultimately, yes, you're playing the game of what is your goal here, and then who are you compatible with, and are you getting into that relationship out of a place of abundance? But also realize that sometimes the stars just won't align. You'll have the right person at the wrong time, and that's okay too.
Yeah. I refer to that often relatively brief interim between having no success with women at all to wanting to find one great woman and, build a life together. I call that time period the kid with a new toy phase, because it's exactly what it's like. It's like, oh my goodness, it's Christmas time. Santa has suddenly left me a whole bunch of goodies and I just want to tear through the wrapping. Right. And women can go through that too, especially after they're newly divorced, et cetera, et cetera. We've all, I'm sure, stumbled upon that bonanza a time or two if we've been single in our 30s or 40s. But yeah, man, there comes a time when you want to get down to what's real. You want to go on international vacations and have the same woman to go with those on. Maybe you want to start a family and not have to see your kids only on weekends and pay child support. All these things that I think, frankly, the guys who are jaded don't even really have a whole lot of visibility into, because they're so busy on the surface just hating on women that they don't ever get around to acknowledging maybe that would be nice in their life, because they don't even allow it to exist in their life, or even the possibility of it. Yeah, man, time has fled here. So what I want to do is actually send these guys to your book, Patrick James, which is called 107 Proven Ways to Get the Girl. And I'm betting one of them is don't be jaded and cynical and be a victim. That's probably 4 of them right there. And you can go get your hands on that book by going to mountaintopodcast.com/raw, which is Patrick James's brand, Raw Dating Advice. A great conversation. Clearly, you and I are both indeed passionate about this and have arrived at some of the same conclusions over the years, which is, I got to say, Patrick, usually reassuring to this audience, because it means there's some truth in there somewhere instead of just a bunch of random opinion and conjecture. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm certainly glad to meet you and make friends with you. And thanks for coming and telling these guys what you know. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, and, looking forward to doing it again in the future.
Yeah, man, we'll definitely have you back. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintopodcast.com lately, I know I say this every show, there are a whole bunch of goodies there for you. Download my free book, Sticking Point Solved. It includes lots of different scenarios with women that you're likely to get into that are sticky, and how to get out of those situations. Also visit our sponsors, Origin in Maine, Heroes Soap. Heroes Soap, by the way, is making shampoo now, and you should check that out. Great stuff. And also thekeyport.com, not your father's Oldsmobile. Even though it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife, this is the 21st century version of it. They've come out with brand new innovations above and beyond what you've seen from them already. If you've gone to thekeyport.com, all 3 of those sponsors, including Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, can be found by clicking on the respective links at mountaintoppodcast.com. When you go to any of those three, use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 for an additional 10% off. I'm here for you guys. Talk to me. Get on my calendar. Let's talk about where you are right now with women. I'm exactly the guy you're going to expect me to be. You can get on my calendar using the red button at the top right-hand corner at mountaintoppodcast.com as well. And until I talk to you again, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.